All right, welcome to another IAEI News Live. My name is Thomas Dimitrovich, and today we're going to continue our discussion around NFPA 70E and safe work practices. And you know what? It all starts now. All right, so welcome, and hopefully you guys and gals out there are ready for a good discussion around the NFPA's safe work practices. So a couple things first. I want you to remember to subscribe. Please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the IAEI YouTube site. I'm looking forward to, we're growing our membership. It's going through the roof. So I really appreciate everybody out there and all of their comments and help and engagement. So please, that's the other thing I expect from each of you out here is to engage in our discussion. Because remember, we may not be in person together, but we are together through the interweb, right? The whole internet of things. And Jody Wages, thanks for joining us. So please, engage in the chat, share your information, share your knowledge, ask your questions. I may or may not know the answer to it. But that's what it's all about. That's the fun thing about going live. So that's I just want to make sure we couch things that way. So let me there we go. So I just want to make sure I've got everything correct here. Hey Lou, good to see you, brother. Good to see you. Okay, so today I've been putting together and I've been trying to put together some materials around 70E, NFPA 70E that hopefully we can all use moving forward. So this is, again, the first draft report. And I did a program on this a little bit ago. But again, I'm trying to just I want to keep creating materials that we can all use. This slide deck that I've put together is, it's primarily language right now, but it hopefully will convey what's going on with regard to NFPA 70E, because remember where we at. We are in mid-cycle, and I'm just going to nfpa.org/70E. We're in mid-cycle, and for the next edition, I'll let you know the dates here. You have until May 31st. Willie Snyder, hey, happy Tech Tuesday. Excellent. So you have until May 31st, 2022 to submit a public comment online. So everything that we're talking about, Felix Sandoval, Colombia, South America, represented. Thank you, sir. So you have until May 31st, 2022 to submit a public comment online. So I just want to make sure you understand that and encourage you as we talk about the changes that we're seeing in 70E. I want you to think about the opportunities in front of us with regard to this great document that we can help improve it. All right, so let's talk a little bit here. First draft. Chapter 1 is safety. Now, I'm skipping over Article 90. I did Article 90. I think I did a good job last time. So if you want to talk a little bit about or hear what's going on in Article 90, which Article 90, I know we love to throw instructions away, but we can't do that. So keep in mind that Article 90 is just as important as Chapter 1, 2, etc. So don't forget about Article 90. There were some, I think, important changes there as well. we're going to go to chapter 1, and I will refer to definitions as we need to, on an as needed basis. All right. So Article 1, Chapter 1 is split up into articles, just like the National Electrical Code is. So you have your Article 90, you've got your Chapter 1, Article 100 is definitions, and I believe all of our definitions are moving to Article 100 across the board. So keep that in mind, that you may love it, you may hate it. I'm just here to tell you about it. So there are definitions are all being moved into Article 100, which might, like I say, you might like it, you might hate it. I know people on both sides of the fence in that regard. Now, oh, well, look at that. I said I wasn't going to cover it, but I do show you some of the organizational structure changes in Article 90. And I'm not going to go into the detail on Article 90, but because I think I did a very extensive, this is really live. This is, you know what, Stephen Froming, when you say, are you live or is it Memorex? You are showing your age, my friend. You're showing your age. I am live. I am live. Yeah, baby. So, but grounding program can be a great tool for us in the field. An assured grounding program, absolutely, Willie. I agree with you 100%. The changes that you see here are important from an organizational structure. You're going to see throughout all of our discussion scope, where it says right here, it says 90.1 scope. They put a lot of scope statements throughout all of these articles in compliance with the style manual. Remember, we're following the NEC style manual. So we see a lot of scope changes. Or not changes, but actually now we have scopes for each of these articles, which I think is an important piece to help us understand. Remember, we've got to put ourselves in the mindset or in the frame of thought. When we're in an article, you have to understand what it pertains to, and the scope statements help us do that. So because though they added these scope statements, the 90.1s and 110.1s and 115.1s and chapter 200.1, all of these scope statements are causing all the numbers to shift. So if you create documents, if you have educational materials, if you have booklets, if you have materials, if your safety program references specific sections of 70E, you're going to have to update those documents, right? So, and I know everybody out there who owns a business has their safety plan. And again, you may reference these sections. And if you do reference sections in 70E, this is the time to get out your dust cloth and dust off that safety plan, because you're going to have to update a lot of those references. All right, so now we're going to talk about chapter Article 100. So, and I think, yes, look at that. I can make it bigger, and I'm not sure why. Oh, I see what I'm doing. Let me shut that off. There we go. So take a look at what we did here, or they did here. You've got 110.1 used to be priority. 110.1 is now scope. So that means everything shifted. Now, what you will see in 110, which I think is important to remember, that there is an emphasis now on establishing an electrically safe work condition. You'll notice in the previous chapters in the previous edition, you had priority, general, electrically safe work condition. Energized work had its own section. You won't find energized work in the new section alignment for Article 110, because establishing in 110.2, what they did was they made the energized work, like a you see, it's in 110.2 now. So what they did was they added it as an exception to establishing an electrically safe work condition. So what does that do? Just think about the mindset. When you put something in as an exception to the rule, you're making the importance on following the rule. That's your primary goal. So what they did in Article 110, and they started this last cycle, remember, in the 2021 edition, 110.1 said priority, and I didn't grab my book. 110.1 was priority, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call up, and I'm telling you what you have to do. NFPA.org. You go and you can try NFPA link for free, or you can subscribe. And I tell you what, I am a believer now in NFPA link. I will honestly tell you that I was not a believer in the past, but I am now. So remember, 110.1 priority said hazard elimination shall be the first priority in the implementation of safety-related work practices, and that was modified. That they moved things around in the this article to emphasize the fact that they want you to establish an electrically safe work condition. All too often we're making compromises when it comes to working energized. So in the previous to 2021, 110.1 focused on the electrical safety program. So what they did in the 2021 cycle was that they now have the 110.1 was titled priority, which established that in your mindset, your priority needs to be to establish an electrically safe work condition. And then in the 2024 cycle, what they're doing to emphasize that even more, they added the scope, obviously, to follow the rules of NFPA, NEC style manual. But then in 110.2, they're focusing on the electrically safe work condition, which is not contrary to what there was in the 2021 cycle. The messaging in the 2021 cycle was your priority is to establish an electrically safe work condition, right? That's your main priority. But because remember, what did 110.1 say? 110.1 said hazard elimination is your number one priority. So, and establishing an electrically safe work condition is the process that we go through to eliminate the hazard. So there was a refocusing of priorities in NFPA 70E over the last two cycles. And I personally like what was done in 110.2. I'm just saying, that's just where my head's at. So they made your energized work, etc., a subset, an exception to when you can't establish an electrically safe work condition. So 110.2, 110.3, and 110.4, those old sections were moved into 110.2. All right, so just important to understand that. So changes in 110.2, again, they do continue that journey, which I think I already said, and it began back in the day. Now, I mean, 2018. Gosh, it seems like a forever ago. 2018, 2021, and now 2024 will continue that journey of emphasizing establishing an electrically safe work condition. 110.2, 3, and 4 now included in that 110.2 titled Electrically Safe Work Condition. We already talked about that. First level subdivision A in 110.2. So they have the language now, it's a policy and not a priority. So if I look at the language, I'm just going to call it up here. So 110.2A used to say priority. Now it says policy. And what they want is the employer to establish a policy to document and establish an electrically safe work condition. That's an important aspect, that it's not a priority. It has to be your policy. And what comes with that? What comes with the exception. So if you're going to do energized work, it has to be justified. You have to go through the process that is required in 110.2 to meet the exception of not establishing an electrically safe work condition. Hopefully you can see the importance and emphasis that they're placing on that. Now, does it change what we do? No. Outside of creating a policy, because it says that the employer has to establish, document, and implement an electrically safe work condition policy that basically requires hazard elimination to be the first priority. So that was your priority from last edition of this document, the current edition of the document. They're putting the priority in the policy. So they're saying your first priority is hazard elimination, and that should be a part of your policy. And then and they want to make sure that you comply with the 110.2C, which is now titled when required, and it tells you when you're required to establish an electrically safe work condition. And then as a part of this whole section, you have your exceptions, and exception number 2 states an energized disconnecting means or isolating equipment shall be permitted to be operated to achieve an electrically safe work condition, or to return equipment to service that has been placed in electrically safe work condition. The equipment supplying the disconnecting means or isolating equipment shall not be required to be placed in electrically safe work condition. So what they're doing is they're helping us establish, and that was informational note number 2, which I'm just trying to see where I don't have that. Well, that's down a little bit further, so we'll get to that one. But in any case, they're cleaned up some of the exceptions and the informational notes to align with the style manual. And this informational notes advising that the policy could be documented in your safety program. So I'd love to know, out of the comments, those of you who are watching, even if you're watching this later, please comment down below. Do you have a safety program? Is it communicated? Who owns it in your organization? If you're an electrical contractor, even if you're a consulting firm or a manufacturer, right? Manufacturers have safety plans. My organization has a safety plan. I'm sure your organization has a safety plan. Was it communicated to you? What are your shalls and shall nots in regard to electrical safety? Those are all important things to understand. Are they communicated to you? And I'd love to know if you do have a safety plan, and maybe your company does. Maybe you don't know. That's a valid answer too. If you don't know if you have a safety plan or not, put the comments down below. I'd really love to hear your feedback on that one. All right, so now that was first level subdivision A. Now B is titled Requirements Until Established. So first level subdivision A is policy. B is requirements until established. So this is telling you that you have to follow electrical conductors and circuit parts are not to be considered in an electrically safe work condition until all of those applicable, quote unquote, applicable requirements that are in 120.6. So 120.6, remember 120 is your establishing your electrically safe work condition, right? So I wish that this was a little easier to navigate, but your Article 120 is are all of those requirements that you need to follow for establishing an electrically safe work condition. Thanks, Willie. Head back to your electrically safe work condition. All right, and I'll look forward to your comments too, Willie. Please provide some feedback down below. So what 110.2 is telling us, they're renaming it to requirements until established, and they're telling us that you need to make sure you meet all the requirements in 120, Article 120, before you can call anything an electrically safe work condition. Hey, Joseph Viola, welcome. Hola, ¿qué pasa? All right. 110.3. All right, so 110. Okay, reference to articles have been removed or aligned. So that's a no-brainer. And then first level subdivision C, this is what's telling us that we have to put things into an electrically safe work condition. And there are 5 exceptions listed in that section. And that's where they put your energized works, right? So if you looked at, there are 5 exceptions. So exception number 1 actually is to item number 2. So remember, you have 7 lists. I'm going to call them list items. In when required, employees within the approach boundary, the limited approach boundary. Robert says, should be electrical safer work condition. Nothing is completely safe. Oh, well, electrically, it can be safe. I mean, put it this way, if I had a panel board on the truck, is it electrically safe? Can I get electrocuted on it? Probably not. Could I get cut? Sure. Could I smash my toe? Absolutely. So it may not be safe. But if I establish an electrically safe work condition, if that piece of equipment is, say it's a transformer sitting out in the yard, probably not going to get electrocuted off of it. But there are other hazards, to your point. Very good point, that there are other hazards that could pose themselves. All right, so when required, you have when you're within that limited approach boundary, and you have to understand what the limited approach boundary is. The equipment is properly maintained. The employee interacts with equipment where conductors or circuit parts are exposed. Now, there's an exception to that, and it says normal operation of electrical equipment shall be permitted where a normal operating condition exists. A normal operating condition exists when all of the following conditions are satisfied. So there are actually 7 items. So there's 2. When it's required is actually, there's only 2 items in there. You have when you're within that limited approach boundary, and 2, when you're interacting with equipment where you have circuit parts or conductors that are energized and exposed. Now, there's an exception, and this is when, for example, you're going to turn a circuit breaker on and off, or you're going to turn a switch on and off. Do you have to suit up for that, right? Do I have to put on my personal protective equipment to turn a circuit breaker on and off? That's a common question I would typically see. And you can't say yes or no unless you reference this section in 110.2c, the exception. It tells you that you don't have to establish an electrically safe work condition when the equipment is properly installed. And what does that mean? Where do we go for for installation requirements? The National Electrical Code. So that means that my circuit breakers are not over-dutied. my equipment short circuit current ratings exceed the available fault current at that equipment, so they're properly applied. I'm applying a overcurrent device or equipment that's rated at a specific voltage at or below the voltage rating that it is rated for. So properly installed. That is on the National Electrical Code's shoulders, right? The equipment is properly maintained. That's what document do we reference? NFPA 70B as in Bob. And that document is currently under a review cycle, which we're going to be creating a document like this for 70B. We're moving into the second draft. Second draft meetings for 70B is happening next in 2 weeks. Two weeks. It's insane. We only got 2 more weeks. So the equipment has to be properly maintained. So you have to make sure that, and this is why when we install products, we get inspections. Why do we do that? Is it to give us gray hairs? No, we do inspections to make sure that the products and the electrical installation is per the National Electrical Code, installed per the requirements. That helps us understand that I can rely on these products because they were installed correctly. Then you got to make sure they're maintained. What reference do I have? NFPA 70B as in Bob. And I have to maintain it over the life of its equipment, of the equipment. And the third item that I believe is new, the equipment is rated for the available fault current. Why do we single out fault current? It's a very important piece of the puzzle. Now, you may argue and say, well, does that have to be in there? Because voltage is also critically important. There are other parameters that are as equally important, and maybe rated for the available fault current is already included in line item 1. So it's all a matter of you got to ask the question, why do I put it there? And it's an important parameter to consider, because when it's not rated correctly from an available fault current perspective, you get what we call an unintended rapid disassembly in the field, right? And that is ungood. So that is a highlighted item in this list. 4 is the equipment is used in accordance with an instruction. So if you're using the equipment and you're not doing something outside of the advisement of the manufacturer, then you're operating within the confines of the instructions. The equipment doors are closed and secure. Very important aspect. All equipment covers are in place and secure, and there's no evidence of impending failure. And I guess that's that's the mixture that tells you can walk up to a switchboard, panel board, switch gear, disconnect switch, any piece of equipment, and operate it. Turn things on and off. Push buttons, turn things on and off. Interact with that piece of equipment, going through the meters, all that good stuff. Because it's well maintained, it was installed correctly, it doesn't pose a hazard if you follow all those rules. The challenge here is, how do you know if it's been maintained? How do you know if the installation meets the original requirements? Because remember, fault current changes, right? I may have added motors, I may have changed out transformers and their impedance values, and now I have equipment that could be overdutied. So be mindful of that. Exception number 2 was added. So this exception recognizes that the disconnecting means that's energized is permitted to be operated to establish an electrically safe work condition. And but what you don't want to do is create another problem, because if you go to that protecting overcurrent device, you go to that protecting switch, which is probably upstream from where you're working, and if it doesn't meet those 7 items, if it's not been maintained, if it hasn't been installed correctly, if its available fault current exceeds its short circuit current rating or interrupting ratings, now you have a problem there, and you can't use that switch to establish an electrically safe. I mean, you could, but you need to dress for it. Maybe you have to go upstream even further to find that known good. And you're right. The first time on, so think about this. So, and I've had this question raised with me on a few job sites where the contractor was going to dress up. And this actually happened to one of our engineering services individuals. They were out at a job site. And when I say ours, my organization, not IAEI's, and remember anything I say, not the opinion of IAEI or NFPA or Eaton or anybody else, or the code making panels or 70E panel. It's not the opinion of anybody other than this guy, right? So these are my opinions. Question everything you hear and everything you see. So please, and provide the feedback. But an engineer was at a job site and they wanted to energize a piece of equipment. And the engineer or the electrician that was there that worked for my organization started putting on personal protective equipment that was appropriate for the incident energy at that facility, at that piece of equipment. And I can't remember who it was, but there was a supervisor there that worked for I believe the owner, and they said, just turn it on. And the individual who was going to do the work said, well, I need to dress for this. And there was a discussion, and then someone else from that facility said, well, I'll just turn it on, and walked over, and it was like a 2,000 amp circuit breaker, right? And before he did that, the individual who was getting dressed said, hold on, let me get my gear and get out of the room, because he didn't want to be in that vicinity, because if something did happen, it would have been a very large event. So, nothing happened, thank God. But was he correct or was he not? He was absolutely correct in what he was saying. Why is that? Because it was the first energization of that equipment. It was not a normal condition. It was an abnormal condition because it was the first energization. Even, I'd say, the second energization. Work is going on in a facility. When you turn something off and establish an electrically safe work condition, and you get into a piece of equipment, you bring in your tools, you're doing your work, you're making your modifications, you pull everything out of there, you think, and then you close up the doors, and now you're going to energize. That is not a normal operating condition. What you're engaging with is the first energization after work has been performed. You don't know if you made a mistake. You don't know if you left equipment in there. You don't know what may or may not have happened. You have to treat that as a first energization. You have to treat it as an abnormal condition, which means you need to dress for an event. So that's an important part of that puzzle. All right, so exception number 3 is the previous 110.4b, which was titled infeasibility. So what they did was they moved the infeasibility into an exception. They moved the additional hazards and increased risk into an exception. They moved equipment operating less than 50 volts into an exception to establishing an electrically safe work condition. So, for example, exception number 5, which was if you are less than 50 volts, then you don't have to establish an electrically safe work condition. That's why it's an exception, right? Doesn't present a shock hazard. All right, so this is a refocus, and I would argue that I don't see anything in 110.2 that, outside of creating a policy, where the owner would have to create a policy, because it does say an employer shall establish, document, and implement an electrically safe work condition policy. And I think you probably have already had that in your plan. Hopefully that is your priority 1, is to establish an electrically safe work condition. So maybe nothing changed at all. All right. Now 110.3. 110.3 is titled Electrical Safety Program. this again was the old section 110.5, and they have first level subdivisions A, E, F, G, and H had some changes. And you'll notice here that all of these are minor changes to the informational notes. So basically they moved 110.5 to 110.3, because remember, we as I said earlier, we lost some of these sections. So a lot of those numbers moved up, but no significant changes in 110.3. First level subdivision I, safety planning for job briefing. Again, minor changes. The job safety planning is now to include an emergency response plan. So that's that I think might be a significant change. Hopefully you're already doing that. But an emergency response plan is critical because you need to make sure that you are able to serve the individuals who may be injured. So you need to have that documented. And yes, Robert, you're right. You do need to provide substantiation for energized work, but you have to meet those exceptions, right? So that's the key. They made those exceptions, so you have to. The rule is to establish an electrically safe work condition, and now the exception is to not do that. You're basically having to argue why you want to follow an exception. So moving it from the rule to an exception, I think, was a very good idea. It's a subtle change. But I think it's a very interesting and important perspective, because it does put you into the proper role of having to justify why you're not following the rule. So. All right, first level subdivision K, electrically safe work condition. Again, it was deleted and incorporated into the 110.2A as part of the 110. So that's your policy. So you see what they did? They took something that was in 110. Which was not even 110.3. Remember, it was 110.5, I believe it was. Was it 110.5? Yeah, it used to be 110.5. You had electrically safe work condition policy was buried down at 110.5. They moved it up to 110.2 in the parent text of that, saying you need to have a policy for establishing an electrically safe work condition. All right, removal of case shifts the numbering around again. So I'm telling you, if you have any documents that reference 70E, they are going to have to change with all these section number changes. So it looks like everything shift two section numbers. So 110.4 is the old 110.6. Parent text informational note was impacted. The only other change to this section is in 110.4A1, a qualified person. And what they're highlighting there is that you can be qualified for certain equipment and tasks to be performed and not others. So you are permitted. So for example, and where's the impact on this? Remember, I'm trying to remember the section. I believe it's in it's maybe in 130. Hold on. 120.5. Is it 130? So 130 has all of your arc flash risk assessments. It has your shock risk assessment, I believe, as well. Helps you understand. There we go. So you have your protection boundaries, your shock protection boundaries, and your limited approach boundaries, etc. So when you get into the boundaries, it tells us that the shock protection boundaries identified shall be applicable where personnel are approaching exposed energized electrical conductors or circuit parts, right? And they'll tell you that in the limited approach boundary, I'll just use it as an example. It says no unqualified person is permitted to approach nearer than the limited approach boundary of energized conductors. Now, qualified person. What do we mean by qualified person? What 110.4 helps us understand, in my opinion, Be completely off base here. But 110.4 is telling us that a person can be qualified for certain equipment and tasks. So that means that if I'm working on a piece of equipment and I have a person who's qualified to hold a flashlight for me while I do work, they're qualified. That means that A, they know how to hold the flashlight. A, they know they can't drop that flashlight. A, they know the equipment that we're working on. They might only be qualified to hold a flashlight for me, to give me light on where I am working, and not qualified to hand me a wrench, to hold a wrench, to open any doors, to move anything, and do anything else other than hold that flashlight for me. That means because they're qualified for that task, based on the limited approach boundary, and it says no unqualified person shall be permitted. So if you are a qualified person and you are permitted to be qualified for a specific function, then you would be permitted to come into that limited approach boundary, not breaking the rules, but you have to be mindful of what you're qualified for and what you're not qualified for. So that is and you have to follow. So it says, where there is a need for an unqualified person to cross the limited approach boundary, a qualified person shall be advised the unqualified person. So it tells you all about what you need to do when you're in that approach boundary. But I would argue, because of what happened in 110.4, that you are now basically saying that you could have somebody who is qualified for a specific function entering that limited approach boundary and be considered qualified for that role only, in whatever that function is. I'd love to hear your opinion on that one. And that's in 110.4A1. I'm just going to take a look at the language here real quick. And you have access. So all of you can have access to this. All you have to do is go out there to nfpa.org/70E next. And you can go take a look at all of these changes. So what they said was such persons shall be familiar. So this is in A1, which is titled qualified person. And they tell you that the qualified person has to be trained and knowledgeable in the construction and operation of equipment or a specific work method, and also have to be able to identify hazards that might be present. And A says such persons shall also be familiar with the proper use of applicable precautionary techniques. Okay, and also your insulating materials and shielding and all that good stuff. It says a person shall be qualified for certain equipment and tasks to be performed. Now, it's a minor rewording of the existing, so you got to be careful that you might not consider this new. You might say, well, Tom, that's always been permitted, because the original language said a person can be considered qualified with respect to certain equipment and tasks to be performed. And they didn't, they reworded it and made it sound a little bit better, but the original intent is there. And then there's a new C, though. A person shall be permitted to be qualified for some equipment or tasks and not others. So I would almost argue that B and C say somewhat the same thing. But remember, you have that overarching dialogue that the qualified person has to be trained and knowledgeable on the electrical hazards associated with the environment as well. All right, so in 110.4a, 110.4 is titled Training Requirements, and this is A1, 1B and C, and I think I just read that B and C is broken out into two. So, and again, I would say almost that B and C are very similarly. I mean, I'd have a hard time. I'd have a hard time justifying why we had to put C in there, but that's just me. And then we skip all the ways to 110.8 for the next change. Now, there was some changes in 110.6, but I'll tell you, they changed the informational note. So this is what you'll see. You might have some informational notes that have changed. They don't change the intent, but they are now in conformance with the NEC style manual. All right, so A, general maintenance and consideration. GFCIs are to be listed. That's new. I mean, I believe it's going in the 2023 cycle. It may already be in the 2020 code, if I'm not mistaken. All of those are going to be listed, and informational notes were modified to align with the style manual. Like I said, there is a new informational note referencing federal and local codes, as well as NFPA 70, the National Electrical Code. So, and it's all about implementing an assured equipment grounding conductor program, which I believe it was Willie, you had made a statement, should be electrically safe work condition. I have head back to my electrically. I think the assured grounding program has been a great tool for us in the field. So there is a new informational note that references some state federal law codes and section 590.6B2 for more information on implementing an assured equipment grounding program. Okay, outdoors, 125 volts is changed to 120 to align with the nominal circuit voltage. I don't believe that it impacts anything. Made some changes in the new informational note. And that's pretty much all in 110. Now 120, again, 120.1, so they renumbered the equipment. And now it, instead of, like, for example, 120.4 was, 120.4 was your, was titled, I think it was 110, 120.4, 110.6. I got to look at 120.4. 120.4, if I'm not mistaken. Lineman's pliers are not designed for a hammer. That's true. Okay, so 120.4 was, which was, I believe, the old 120.3, because everything moved up because there's a new scope, was lockout tagout equipment. Now they're calling it a device. So it's lockout tagout devices. So there's the sort of the reorganization, you know, adding a scope in moves everything down one. So that happened in a lot of articles. I mean, throughout the 70E. I'm telling you, if you are referencing sections in 70E, you're going to have a nightmare. So 121.scope, that's basically telling you what the scope of that document is. Then 120.2 is your lockout tagout program. They made some changes to address the style manual. I don't believe a lot of those changes will impact the enforcement of it, but you just got to be mindful of why they made the changes, because if you mistakenly think that they no longer put weight and importance on that requirement, then you would you would be mistaken. Informational note was modified so that's a no-brainer. A tagout device. So in 120.4D, 120.4, which used to be 120.3, that was your tagout device that was still named device, and 120 and C was lockout device. So they changed equipment to device, and it really falls in line with that. So and all they did there was they changed, and it was just a mistake that was made, to 50 pounds to convert to newtons. The conversion was not done correctly. All right, so a new policy. So this is the only planning. First of all, locating sources, a new informational note. Locating sources of supply could include identifying situations where a neutral conductor continues to carry current. So that neutral conductor, there were a few public, at the IEEE, Institute of Electronic Engineers, had some public, or some, what do you call it, papers that were written concerning that neutral conductor. That can kill you. We can't underestimate. We call it the grounded conductor, but it carries current in many cases. That conductor carries current, and if you become a part of that circuit, That's the return path. You become a part of that circuit, and that current will pass through your body. That is a very important thing to remember, that you can become energized. And the informational note is just raising the awareness of that. Okay, conductor circuit parts are not considered to be electrically safe until 120.6. So again, raising the awareness of that, because it says in that informational note, I believe we put some notes in there to reference 120.6. You got to keep in mind that 110.2b tells you that all conductors and circuit parts, that includes that neutral. Lockout tagout procedures. Existing 120.57 does not have a requirement to verify that neutral is de-energized. So that I think is the reason for the informational note. And it may beg the question on why don't we have some language in there that that tells us to look at that neutral. And then how do you identify whether or not that neutral is indeed energized? There's a lot to be said about that. And unfortunately, this language is written in blood. All right. So that neutral has killed people. I know of that personally. So you can't underestimate every single conductor in a power distribution system. It's a step in the right direction to raise awareness, in my opinion. All right, so 120.5b, elements of control. To the extent that the circuit cannot be unintentionally energized, all they wanted to do is add clarity. Then they went through the elements of control. Informational note was added to align with the style manual and made some changes. List item 7 was modified. 110 again to clarify that the measurement of absence of voltage is necessary at each point of work. This is a challenge, I think. It says at each point of work. What does that mean? I don't know what that means, and I'm struggling with that one. In my opinion. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what do they mean by verifying absence of voltage at each point of work. There are some exceptions. Number 1 to 7, an adequately rated, permanently mounted absence of voltage tester is permitted to be used to test for absence of voltage. Now, you've got to make sure that that you follow these rules. So this exception leverages an existing, a specific piece of equipment listed in a certain way. So it says the exception to 1 to 7. So let's take a look at that real quick. I know I'm not over yet. Let's take a look. And this is 120.6, right? Exception number 1 to 7. 120.6, exception number 1 to 7. An adequately rated, permanently mounted absence of voltage tester is permitted to be used to test for absence of voltage of the conductors or circuit parts at the work location, and it has to meet all of the following requirements. A, it's permanently, and I got them right here, permanently mounted and installed, and you have to follow the manufacturer's instructions. It's listed and labeled for the purpose of testing for absence of voltage. It tests each phase conductor, and the test device is verified as operating satisfactorily on any known voltage source before. Now, there was and that did not change. Those reasons and that exception in itself didn't change. What did change are some of the informational notes. Informational note number 2. Informational note number 2 references UL 1436, which they just rearranged it for clarity. And so both of these informational notes were just modified for clarity, but it's important to understand that UL 1436 is your driver for the listing requirement of these solutions. That helps you ensure you meet these items. And they rearranged informational note number 3 just to align with the style manual. So no major changes there. Now we're in Article 130, work involving hazards. Again, they added a scope. So if you look at these sections, I think I can do this. Yep. So you'll notice that it used to be 130.1 general. Now it's 130.1 scope. So everything moved down. The energized electrical work permit. It used to be one. Well, no, that is still. So they moved. They were just renamed general. So it looks like, look at this. 130.8, 131, all of those stayed the same. So if you are in 130, Article 130, work involving electrical hazards, you don't need to make any changes because all they did was retitle 130.1 from general to scope. And that, my friends, is a good thing. I hope you agree. All right. So the scope statement just tells you that, and it was changed to scope. Elements of a work permit. Informational note was modified to align with 220 style manual, so that's a piece of cake. In the shock risk assessment, they changed the general. They changed A, E, and F. Let's take a quick look. A, removed, including the use of PPE from the list. Item 3, which now focuses on determining if the additional protective measures are required. So PPE is already covered in 130.4C, so you don't need to repeat it in A3. So that's already in C. All right, NHX BOI, thanks for joining. NHZX. All right, and then shock protection boundaries. What do we do there? E, shock protection, note B for the table reference, 130.4F3 instead of 130.4D2. In the table noted B applies to both the limited approach boundary columns and the restricted approach boundary columns. So the original reference does not exist, so they just fixed a reference. And a new item E that clearly references the restricted approach boundary requirements. So piece of cake. Limited approach boundary requirements. 1, approach by unqualified persons. 2, work at close. So this was, remember, our limited approach. We were just talking about that. And 130.4, we were just talking about that in reference to the qualified person, remember? And the change that they did in F, there's no, yeah, so all they did there, shall in 2, approached by an unqualified person is 1. In 2, the word advise was changed to warn. No big deal. And they said warn him or her. They want to be gender neutral. So nothing major there. Shall be warned the unqualified persons. All right. And then in 130.5C, from 130.5, they made changes in B, C, E, G, and H. So in B, they modified the informational note. Again, 130.7C, 130.7 Charlie 15B was relocated to follow 130.5B. So, and that clarifies that all the arc flash risk assessments, closed doors do not provide enough protection to eliminate the need for PPE in situations where the state of the equipment is known to readily change. The doors are open and closed periodically and or when equipment is racked out. The challenge with the informational note is the interpretation of state of the equipment. That's true, and that's just that's a challenge. So I think we need some clarity on what do we mean by changing the state of the equipment. The state of the system could change, right? Available fault currents change, voltages change. But what do we mean by change of the state of the equipment? That's a little bit of a gray area. Okay, 130.5. It's 1 o'clock, 1:01. I started about a minute late. So I've got I've got some material here that I think we can use to help us understand the changes in 70E. And I will continue to work on this document, and I'm going to start creating a 70B document. So Lou Petrucci, thank you for joining us. Hopefully you got something, you guys and gals out there got something out of this session. We will be continuing these discussions moving forward on 70E. And Felix, thank you. And Lou, thanks for joining in. Robert from Omaha, thank you for joining in. All of you out there who spent time with me during my lunch, during your lunch, and maybe during your morning or your evening, depending upon what part of the world you are in. Thanks for taking the time. And I really appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel, IAEI channels. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up. And please don't forget to be safe. That's what this session was all about. So I really appreciate your time. I appreciate what you do for the electrical industry. And I appreciate what you do for IAEI as well. So thank you. And until next week, I'm going to have to say goodbye for now. Joseph, Violi, thanks, and have a great day. Have a great evening. Have a great rest of your week if I don't see you before next week. So thanks, everybody. I have to tune out and jump on another call. Take care, stay safe, and please stay healthy.